I'm Veronica Buto. Tonight on EWTN News Nightly, war on drugs. The Trump administration authorizes CIA operations in Venezuela. We have the latest. Call for action. The Vatican releases its second annual report on the protection of minors. We're in Rome. Gen Z takeover, how youth groups are inspiring military action in African countries. We speak to a priest on the ground. Plus, open doors. We go to Iraq, where historic Christian churches are reopening after years of ISIS occupation. These stories and more tonight.
From EWTN, the Global Catholic Network, this is EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you for being with us on the Feast of St. Margaret Mary Alacoque. Our top story tonight. President Donald Trump plans to hold a second summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The two leaders agreed to meet in Budapest, Hungary. Trump believes they're making great progress to bring the war in Ukraine to an end. He also meets tomorrow with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. The diplomatic push represents just one of Trump's foreign policy challenges. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen.
Veronica, good evening to you. President Donald Trump says U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio will meet with a Russian delegation next week to advance the talks. Meanwhile, the president also confirming that he's authorized the CIA to conduct covert operations in a different country, Venezuela.
As the U.S. military carries out a series of deadly strikes against alleged drug smuggling boats in the Caribbean, destroying at least 5 boats since early September and killing dozens, President Donald Trump lays out his reasons for taking covert action in Venezuela.
Number one, they have emptied their prisons into the United States of America. They came in through the border. They came in because we had an open border policy. And as soon as I heard that, I said, a lot of these countries, they're not the only country, but they're the worst abuser. And the other thing are drugs. We have a lot of drugs coming in from Venezuela. And a lot of the Venezuelan drugs come in through the sea, so you get to see that. But we're going to stop them by land also.
Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro lashed out at the record of the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency in various conflicts around the world, especially in Latin America. At one point, President Maduro spoke in English, making this appeal.
No war, just peace on the people of the United States. Please. Please, please, please.
A former Colombian ambassador to the U.S., now running for president, says both Venezuelans and Colombians would celebrate if there is regime change in Venezuela, adding,
put it this way, Venezuela has become a narco state. They have narco-communism in the head of Maduro. He leads the cartel de los Soles. And that's very bad news for Latin America.
Asked by a reporter if the CIA has the authority to take out Maduro.
Oh, I don't want to answer a question like that. That's a ridiculous question for me to be given. Not really a ridiculous question, but wouldn't it be a ridiculous question for me to answer? But I think Venezuela is feeling heat, but I think a lot of other countries are feeling heat too. We're not going to let this country, our country, be ruined.
And on the north lawn of the White House, I asked the press secretary about Maduro's future.
Nicolas Maduro, does President Trump believe, Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela, does President Trump believe his days are numbered there?
I think President Trump believes that Nicolas Maduro is an illegitimate president leading an illegitimate regime that has been trafficking drugs to the United States of America for far too long, and we're not going to tolerate it.
Now, the United States is offering a $50 million reward for the arrest and conviction of Maduro. Meanwhile, Maduro recently wrote a letter to Pope Leo, asking the Holy Father for his help in maintaining peace in Venezuela. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
For more on Venezuela, I want to bring in Dr. Evan Ellis. He is a research professor of Latin American Studies at the U.S. Army War College Strategic Studies Institute. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on the program.
Now, President Trump said he authorized the CIA to conduct covert operations inside Venezuela. What might this entail?
First of all, he didn't say when. The implication is the future, but it wouldn't surprise me if the CIA, just because of the gravity of the situation, has been on the ground in Venezuela for quite some time. You have a series of things you need to do when you're trying to deal with drug operations, and especially if you're thinking of a transition away from Cartel de los Soles, talking or negotiating with the people who could be instrumental in moving against the Maduro government, trying to locate Maduro and the other key leaders, trying to understand what's going on the ground if you are planning a future ground operation. So in general, it's not necessarily just the romanticized concepts of the CIA bringing down a regime, but it's a series of important intelligence activities that you have to do in support of possible operations against our forces and in support of a possible transition to another regime and hopefully towards democracy.
Do you think this is about regime change?
I think President Trump has gotten to the end of his tolerance on this basically illegitimate regime that is doing harm to the U.S. through drugs, through pushing out migrants, through hosting other threats such as the Russians, the Iranians, Hezbollah, and of course the Chinese. At the end of the day, I think that if U.S. action against the leadership of the Cartel de los Soles results in regime change and the transition to the legitimately elected government of Edmundo Gonzalez, everyone in Washington would cheer that. But I don't know if democracy per se is the object, but rather thinking about U.S. interest in stopping harm to those who are doing damage to U.S. interests.
How likely is it that the U.S. would commit to a large-scale operation, and what would be the goals?
Well, first of all, I think a large-scale operation is possible, but not necessarily a long-term operation. So the force that's there, the Amphibious Ready Group, the 2nd Marine Expeditionary Unit, about 2,200 Marines, in addition to a lot of precision missile capabilities and strike capabilities from the 3 destroyers, from the cruiser, from, of course, the air superiority from the F-35s that are there stationed out of Puerto Rico. So I think there's more than enough capability to do a rapid, multi-pronged operation over land, over sea, in conjunction with intelligence that you might have through entities like the CIA and in negotiation with people on the ground to grab Maduro, to grab others, Delcy Rodriguez, Jorge Rodriguez, Vladimir Perino Lopez, and to try to bring them to justice in the United States or alive or not if necessary. Now, I doubt that you would see an Operation Just Cause kind of 1989 style operation when we moved against the other, illegitimate drug leader Manuel Noriega in Panama. I don't think that you would see the U.S. investing a lot of time to ensure the transition to democracy. However, certainly, Maria Corina Machado and Edmundo Gonzalez, the legitimately elected leaders, would have the opportunity to make that work on their own. But I think any operation would be focused on eliminating the threat of Cartel de los Soles and not necessarily in trying to assure a transition to democracy.
How is the U.S. role in the region changing?
Well, certainly you're seeing more focus on Latin America in a number of different ways. You've seen Secretary Rubio do a number of visits to the Caribbean, places like Jamaica, places like Suriname, places like Guyana, in ways that have been unprecedented before. You're certainly seeing a lot more focus on the role of China, especially in areas that are close in, such as Panama. I think you're seeing also a shift in the countries that we're working with and the basis on which we're working with those countries, looking towards business that would be win-win for America's first objectives. You saw that with Javier Milei in Argentina, who just recently met with President Trump in the White House. You also see it with a number of other important U.S. partners, Daniel Noboa in Ecuador, Santiago Peña in Paraguay, and even the possibility that you see a shift towards a more pro-U.S. government in Bolivia based on what happens in the Sunday's election. So there's actually, I think, important advances that are being made and an increased focus on trying to make sure that U.S. security interests are protected, whether it's against drugs or it's against the advance of China.
Dr. Evan Ellis, thank you so much for your insights on this unfolding topic.
Thank you.
The situation in the Middle East is also on the list of the president's foreign policy challenges. Today, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowed the return of all hostages. He shared remarks at a newly established National Remembrance Day for the victims of the October 7th attack.
We embrace the families of the hostages, those who have returned and those we will bring back, and we are committed to bringing them all back until the very last one.
Hamas has said they have handed over all the hostages they can easily access without special equipment. This, as President Trump says today, if Hamas continues to kill people in Gaza, he'll have no choice but to go in and kill them. In the Oval Office, President Trump made a major announcement about in vitro fertilization drugs.
In the Trump administration, we want to make it easier for all couples to have babies, raise children, and start the families they've always dreamed about. That's why today I'm pleased to announce that after extensive negotiations, EMD Serrano, the largest fertility drug manufacturer in the world, has agreed to provide massive discounts to all fertility drugs they sell in the United States, including the most popular drug of all, the IVF drug,
The church is opposed to IVF because, as the Catechism of the Catholic Church teaches, it separates the Marriage Act from procreation and establishes the domination of technology over human life. The process results in the destruction of millions of human embryos, which ends human lives. It's day 16 of the government shutdown. Once again, Senate Democrats voted for a 10th time to keep federal offices closed as hundreds of thousands of government workers aren't getting paid. Meanwhile, over 4 million people could lose their Obamacare subsidies by the end of the year, and millions more will see their premiums skyrocket if Congress doesn't act. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales joins us with the latest. Eric.
Good evening, Veronica. People across the country are getting sticker shock as they open their mail seeing the new Obamacare premiums for next year. As we mentioned, the government subsidies end January 1st, and Democrats are clamoring for Republicans to work with them. But House Speaker Mike Johnson says getting that done by the end of the year is not going to happen due to its complexity.
Healthcare is entwined with somewhere, I think it's 15% of the U.S. economy is the healthcare system. And you can't just rip it out at the roots and start over it. It's a very, very complicated series of measures and steps that you have to take to fix it.
One of those fixes, Republican Senator Josh Hawley wants is to close the loopholes of Obamacare, allowing taxpayer dollars to fund abortions and transgender surgeries for minors.
Health plans on the exchange cannot fund transgender procedures for minors, and they cannot fund abortions. And, you know, the ACA was not supposed to ever cover abortions, elective abortions. But the insurance companies have found loophole after loophole.
I asked Democrat Senator Richard Blumenthal about this.
Federal funds can't be used for abortion. All of these myths and misconceptions and misinformation are part of a Republican strategy to discourage the ACA healthcare tax credit.
Senator Roger Marshall, an obstetrician, tells me he supports Senator Hawley's bill and says he worked with many teens and their parents on the transgender issue.
Let's try to get through life without any permanent scars. Sexually transmitted diseases, pregnancies, those types of things, let alone a life-changing surgery that they can never reverse.
Democrats say the shutdown won't end until Republicans work with them on an agreement.
The ACA crisis is looming over everyone's head, and yet Republicans seem ready to let people's premiums spike by tens of thousands. That's who the hostages are, the American people.
Speaker Johnson says the House won't come back until the government reopens, preventing health care negotiations. Republican Congressman Kevin Kiley thinks that's the wrong path.
Sometimes, you have to work with people who you believe are acting unreasonably in order to do the right thing for the country. And so that's why I think it's absolutely the wrong decision to have the House of Representatives not even here right now.
After the failed vote, senators closed up shop and went back home to their state. So that means the government shutdown will enter a fourth week. Democrats and party activists are planning a No King's Day protest on Saturday with marches and rallies in more than 2,500 locations nationwide, including the National Mall right here in D.C. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
In Madagascar, despite a recent coup d'etat, things are starting to return to normal. Businesses reopened and public services have resumed. This after the president was forced out of office earlier this week. On Tuesday, the country's military announced the presidency will be assumed collectively by officers. It's the latest in a series of protests that have broken out across the continent. Father Don Bosco, editor-in-chief of ACI Africa, joins us now. Thank you so much for your time. Now, the uprising in Madagascar is one of several uprisings right now, mostly led by the younger generation known as Gen Z. What are you seeing in places like Kenya and elsewhere?
Thanks for having me, Veronica. Yes, on this continent, I think where I am in Kenya has been one of those that have experienced the Gen Z-led protests. And that was last year here in Kenya. And now the late one is in Madagascar, where young people call government to, they call the power to, they call the government to address the challenges the country is facing. And in Madagascar in particular, it's been resulting into the president fleeing the country.
Now, what are their main frustrations leading to these protests? What are their sticking points?
It's case by case. In the case of Madagascar, the young people were experiencing power outages and scarcity of water. So these are essential commodities that people living in urban centers, but also in rural centers, should be having. So this was the what you could say immediate cause, but the underlying causes are challenges of leadership. They speak about corruption. They say they have been voicing these concerns and nobody has been listening to them, and so that's why then they went on the streets. For Madagascar specifically, they also took advantage of the absence of the president. He was out of the country. So when he came back, already the uprising was on, and it just became unstoppable.
Now, a lot of high emotions and tension. Have we heard from the church in Africa? Have they commented on any of these protests?
In Madagascar, in particular, the president himself is a Catholic. And he takes actually an active role in many of the church events. A couple of years ago, he even was at the Vatican visiting the Pope, then Pope Francis. The church has been very active in advising the government. Specifically as a Catholic church, they are also called upon to give advice, but also as part of the Council of Christian Churches in Madagascar, FFKM. And so they were calling the protesters to dialogue. They were advocating for a sit down, especially when the protests turned violent and there were deaths. So the interventions have been for dialogue, but also they have voiced concerns about the challenges of corruption and services that were not being provided for the people of God in the country.
Father Don Bosco, editor-in-chief of ACI Africa, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, and God bless.
We have a lot more still to come on EWTN News Nightly, including protecting the children. The Vatican releases new guidelines for the care of abuse victims. We'll take a closer look along with the Pope's response. And resurrection in Iraq. We'll visit the latest church to reopen years after ISIS occupation. Victims of abuse say they want to be heard, and some feel that the Catholic Church must do more to help sexual abuse survivors. This is according to a new report presented by the Holy See. It calls for greater transparency from the Vatican. EWTN Vatican News Correspondent Valentina Di Donato has more.
Today, the second annual report on safeguarding policies in the Catholic Church was published by the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors. It sets forth a series of guidelines aimed to help ecclesial communities listen to victims that have endured abuse. That in turn will help them implement restorative measures aimed at resolving the global issue of the abuse of minors. The panel that took part in the creation of this report comprised leaders of the Pontifical Commission, but also other experts in the field of child advocacy.
The Church plays a very critical role. I grew up in a Catholic school. I started my professional work in a Catholic charity called Medical Missionaries of Mary. I know personally for a fact the force for good that the Church can actually be.
Professor Benjamin Medzamour of the UN Committee of the Rights of the Child has an extensive career that has led him to years of groundwork across the globe.
I have the privilege to have had worked in close to 90% of the African countries. I've had the opportunity to visit those countries, not for holiday, but for work. And in many of those occasions, I posed the question, what are the sexual abuse cases like? Where are the perpetrators coming from, and so forth. And when I hear the word, there are no cases, I cringe. I can give you some of the reasons why there are no cases. Sometimes in a community, the circle of trust is very strong. You cannot really break from that circle of trust. Sometimes it's because of poverty. If you're getting services that are critical to your livelihood, it could be water, it could be sanitation, from the same provider where you've actually have been abused, then it becomes very difficult to report.
The report is the first to be released since the election of Pope Leo XIV. It calls for greater transparency from the Vatican and noted with concern that survivors often perceive the Church's central administration as, quote, lacking in sensitivity. Monsignor Luis Manuel Ali Herrera, secretary of the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors, says that Pope Leo XIV is particularly focused on this issue.
Se interesó muchísimo.
He was very interested in all these findings, and especially since he also has canonical training, he is very interested in these issues in order to improve more and more. Because he himself told us he is concerned because many of the processes are very slow, taking years, and he is also very interested in the victims being cared for empathetically by their bishops in the local churches.
Empáticamente.
The document also analyzes how to handle reparations, which the encyclical Dilexit Nos also focuses on, underscoring the true spirit of reparations. If it is to be Christian, to touch the offended person's heart and not be a simple act of communicative justice, presupposes two demanding things: acknowledging our guilt and asking forgiveness.
I'm fairly confident that things are moving in the right direction. Accountability plays a very important role. When we talk about reparations, it's not just only about financial, it's about reinstitutions, it's about apologies, it's about guarantees of non-repetition. The more comprehensive way we look at this, the better. It is intended to give every child in every part of the world the best chance that they can have to give life, the best shot that they can actually give it.
In Rome, Valentina Di Donato for EWTN News Nightly.
Up next on EWTN News Nightly, symbols of hope. Iraq brings life back to the sacred places scarred by war. Plus, a new law in Uruguay that church leaders say is encouraging a culture of death. Welcome back. Lawmakers in Uruguay have passed a measure decriminalizing euthanasia. It is the first such law in Latin America. Church leaders say the move encourages a culture of death. Uruguay already bans any mention of God in oaths of office and calls Christmas, quote, family day. While the new law permits euthanasia, it does not allow assisted suicide and prohibits its use for minors. Two historic churches, once shattered by ISIS, have reopened their doors in the Iraqi city of Mosul. Restored and revived, they now stand as symbols of hope and coexistence. EWTN Rodi Sher has the story.
Here in Mosul's Old City, the bells have rung again. The faithful gathered as Al-Tahira Church reopened its doors, and nearby St. Thomas Church, one of Iraq's oldest Christian sites, welcomed worshippers for the first time in nearly a decade. These scenes of rubble show what Mosul looked like after its liberation in 2017, a city in ruins after years under ISIS control. Churches, mosques, and markets alike lay shattered. Among them stood St. Thomas Church and Al-Tahira Church, each centuries old and deeply rooted in the city's Christian identity. The St. Thomas Church, built in the 7th century, is said to stand on the very house where the Apostle Thomas stayed during his journey to the east. The Al-Tahira Church on the other side, constructed in the 18th century, was one of Mosul's most beautiful churches.
It's humbling and very special to see it reopen, and I do think it's important for people to come and see the incredible changes in Mosul. I think that it's a testament to the resilience of the community that this place can reopen and be a center of love and peace for all of Old Mosul.
Both churches were damaged during the war. Their restoration began through the Mosaic de Mosul initiative, launched by Alif Foundation, the French National Institute of Heritage, Le Vordorian, and Iraq's State Board of Antiquities and Heritage.
Today it is an important day, historic day, for the inauguration of the restoration of the important church, Mar Thoma, of the Syrian Orthodox. This is an important work which was done during the last few years for the restoration and the rehabilitation of a church which was completely damaged by Daesh.
At the reopening ceremony, Cardinal Luis Sacco of the Chaldean Catholic Church and Patriarch Mar Ignatios Afram II of the Syriac Orthodox Church stood side by side, joined by the representatives of French Consulate and the Alif Foundation to celebrate this historic moment.
You know, the renewal of these chairs for us, these chairs go back to the 7th century. So this is our roots, our history. Our liturgy was here organized and prepared. So this is for every Christian in the city a sign of hope.
From destruction to devotion, Mosul's churches stand once more witnesses of resilience, unity, and rebirth. For EWTN News from Mosul, Iraq, this is Rodi Sher.
Today, the church celebrates the feast of St. Margaret Mary Alacoque. St. Margaret Mary was born in France in 1647. At the age of 24, she entered the Order of Visitation Nuns. 3 years later, she experienced visions of Christ who wanted to show his love for humanity through her. Many people doubted and ridiculed her over the visions, but her confessor, the Jesuit priest and future saint Claude Le Colombier, believed and supported her. Through her tireless efforts, the modern devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus was established. She died in 1690 and was canonized in 1920. St. Margaret Mary, pray for us. We thank you for watching tonight. Remember, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, X, and Instagram at EWTN News Nightly. I'm Veronica Dudo. Good night and God bless.